Hello, my name is Julia Sherwood. I'm a translator, but this time I'm here as one of the editors of this publication, the Book of Bratislava, an anthology of short stories about Slovakia's capital, which I have co-edited with the literature scholar Radoslav Passia, and the book was published by Coma Press in March this year as part of the series Reading the City. The stories here have been written by 10 different writers and translated by 10 different translators, and four of them are included in this joint reading. So I hope you enjoy it.
Hello, my name is John Minahan. I'm going to read a few sentences from Jan Rosner's story called The Day After the Front, meaning the day after the Germans had withdrawn from the city of Bratislava in April 1945. Always I had to be on the street when something was going on in the city. I had gazed from the pavement to witness processions and parades and demonstrations, those I agreed with and those I raged against with my whole soul. So it was while the First Republic still lasted. So it was maybe less than a month ago when Bratislava had its last, by then miniature, rally. The Russians were then in Liptovsky Mikuláš, and afterwards they had to withdraw from Mikuláš again. Shanomach spoke then for the last time from the balcony of the National Theatre, no longer to masses and the mustered units of paramilitary guardsmen, but only to larger or smaller clusters of people. Then, too, I was standing, not far off, in the little park by the Reduta, not so that I might hear the orator, but to judge the attendance, and from that to draw conclusions about changes in the political attitudes of the people of this city. I was on the streets during alerts and after alerts, when somewhere something was burning, when houses somewhere were lying in rubble as if by a single blow from the heavenly ram. I was on the streets having been dragged out there along with others. I went out on the streets when the city, a week or so ago, began crawling into holes for a front season hibernation. Even on that final day, before it crawled in completely, I was one of the last who was still going through this town. I made my circuit, as in years gone by, and I was on the streets to gather full bags of the canned foods of the Wehrmacht when the non-academic stores in the university basement went aflame. And now on this day, I suddenly realized what it was my duty to do. To go out on the streets when the city was awakening, or actually still was not awakening, but was showing the first signs of life. And yet it would be different this time. An automatic was still rattling somewhere now and again. Maybe there was no longer any fighting. Maybe soldiers somewhere were letting off shots just for mischief. And still, somewhere above the city, beyond the city, artillery pieces were thumping, although ever more sporadically, but they had not fallen quite silent yet. And those sounds that were first deep and grave and then piercingly whistling were not made by weapons that soldiers would have loaded just whimsically. Once again, the broken shop windows surfaced in my mind. But I was no longer thinking of a thing that I could not guess and which nonetheless I wanted to have. Now, when I had fixed on a definite aim, imagination suddenly conjured a goal from the ambit closest to me. I saw a shop window before which I had stood many times. Diligently I had studied it many times with my gaze so that nothing would escape me. Only that I worried whether that shop window too would be broken. But surely, I persuaded myself, the soldiers doubtless had shot all the windows in series. Certainly that window too would be broken, Assuredly, they did not make any exceptions, and I knew that window from recent times, maybe even the past week, so well that suddenly, when I was not seeking anything unknown, I even knew what I would have reached for there, why I would have gone there, in front of that window.
This is the Book of Bratislava. The story is called The Last Days of Stoka by Lucia Piusi, read by Janet Livingstone. It's a warm September night in 2006, and the Stoka pub, half full of drunks, is swaying like a house on stilts. Lucia, with a glass of red wine that she's just poured herself behind the bar, surveys the room. At table 1 sits no-neck cupboard number 1 Stano, playing with his mobile phone. The cockroaches are walking past him quietly, but as soon as they get through to the hall to the bathroom, or into the second room, or into the foyer, they get braver and start shouting. They're pushing it, Lucia thinks to herself, and looks in the direction of the open doors leading out to the terrace. Gabo is there standing in a cloud of smoke, wafting out from the pub under a yellow light glowing from above the entrance like someone in a Bergman film looking out towards the Danube. Lucia goes to him with the wine in her hand. Lucia: I took your words to heart that I think too much. There's some truth in it. I thought about it a lot, and I have to say you were right. She takes a sip of wine. Gabo nods like a wise man, but says nothing. He observes everything in silence and keeps his comments to himself. Lucia, well trained in hypervigilance from her everyday battles with the cockroaches, looks over his shoulder, focusing her vision on the darkness. She sees a drunk guy with a shaved head staggering around by one of the flower pots that line the terrace, a bottle of Thirsty Monk beer in his hand. From his clumsy movements, it's clear that he's trying to unzip his fly and pee into a flower pot. Lucia just sighs. Lucia: You've already got a nickname. Do you know what they call you? Gabo: Who? Lucia: The regulars. Gabo: What? Lucia: Viking. She looks at Gabo. She's exhausted. She'd like to say to him, I picked you out of the crowd. You can't disappoint me. If you're really a man, then help me. But she doesn't say it. She just looks down dumbly into her glass. Lucia: Viking is a good nickname. Shows you already have authority. Gabo: That's what they called me in prison. Gabo moves. He's like a soldier. He doesn't miss anything. Her glance into the dark over his shoulder, although quick, was a signal. He turns and sees the person peeing into the flower pot and, with ease, hands in his pockets, strides heavily in his steel-toed shoes toward them. Lucia stiffens. Just don't kill him, she says to herself, and starts to tremble. Gabo approaches the young man and leans his pit bull head in towards him. Gabo's hands are still in his pockets, as if he's come to ask the guy how he's doing. The guy turns his face to Gabo and immediately sobers up. Anyone who hasn't worked in a pub, a dive where people go every day just to dull their pain with drink, whether they're smart or stupid, and where there's always the danger of an explosion of evil inside those thick skulls, anyone who hasn't been through that would never believe how people who are out of their minds can sober up in a second when they're truly afraid. That look sticks in your head forever. What did we waste all that money on booze for? They ask then. Mouths dry, pale, and barely able to walk straight. This young one does the same, just rolls his eyes and disappears into the darkness. Lucia blows smoke with pleasure. A cigarette never tastes as good as it does after a moment of unnecessary fear has passed. Gabo approaches.
My name is Magdalena Molek, and I will be reading from my translation of Alta Vashova's The Color of Sand. She took a deep breath. The scent of the river absorbed her so much that she lived only for it. She was aware of the rocks on the shore, ancient trees on the other side, the lazy, muddy current, even the movement of the sand at the bottom, although it wasn't visible. Back in the day, she used to watch her feet, altered by the color and movement of the cold water, as they searched for spots of sand or small pebbles and avoided slippery rocks. Sometimes she'd catch a glimpse of small fish or algae that had managed to stick, or trap pieces of wood. Then she'd hold her breath and plunge into the current, let herself be carried, and finally she'd struggle against the flow to reach a spot on dry land. She'd delight in the experience of insurmountable fear until her hands and feet felt the safety of sand and gravel once more, and then she'd walk barefoot over the warm, rounded pebbles back to her blanket. Back in the day. Now the only one who'd walk into the river would be a fisherman in waders, an optimistic fisherman. Even fishermen have disappeared from Bratislava's shores. It's been a long time since their large nets have hung over the water. She used to see him here already then. She could picture his tanned figure. Everyone used to be tanned from the Danube sun, their dry skin peeling to be replaced by fresh pink skin. It wasn't considered dangerous. The sun was their friend. They didn't use creams or oils. They didn't protect themselves from it in any way. It was as if it were yesterday. Sand-colored plains, gnarly trees, only indispensable conversations in the silence, burning heat. In spite of the changes, the Danube hadn't lost its power over her. It always pulled her irresistibly whenever she felt exhausted, uncertain, always calming her. She had shared with it the hopes of her first fledgling relationships. They used to sit on a riverbank beneath the university dormitories and talk about everything and nothing. After all, the most important thing was the closeness of their bodies, trust, and privacy. Later, she brought her small children to the river. There they learned to walk, ride a scooter, and skip stones. It was where she ran in her giddiness over her newfound freedom when she was finally no longer subject to the relentless cycle of a work schedule. And she almost always saw him there. Come to think of it, they had aged together, without their eyes meeting or their words. How could she have forgotten? He was part of the river. She had seen him wearing ice skates when part of the Danube turned into an endless ice rink. It had trustingly spread out a smooth, glassy surface beneath the skater's sharp blades. She had seen him dive headfirst from a thick willow branch over a shady inlet. She had seen him ford the river to the other side over boulders. The only place she hadn't seen him was the island, Cormorant Island, but she only used to swim there side by side with one person. At the hospital, she hadn't recognized him. His face was connected with the Danube for her. But what if it was someone else walking in front of her? Thus far, he hadn't looked back. He stopped in the middle of the bridge, as if he sensed the need to examine it. She was getting ready to walk around him, dash by unnoticed, but suddenly the words burst out of her. Now that it's impossible to swim, at least we have walks. I'm sorry, I never speak to anyone. Are you afraid? I am. And now? Now I'm afraid for you.
I'm Jonathan Gresty. I'm going to read an extract from a story called Petzo by Richard Pupala. I don't like my childhood. Lenka kept pestering me about what I looked like as a boy and didn't believe me when I told her I had no photos. I'd thrown them all away when I cleared out Mum's flat. Got rid of everything, as if it were rubbish. I didn't tell her that, though. It would have only led to other topics of conversation. She later accused me of not letting her get close and said she always felt like she was just visiting when we lived together. What she wanted to say was that I wasn't ready for a serious relationship. Fair enough. It wasn't just that we sometimes got on each other's nerves. The fact is, I don't always like having to share my space with somebody. I bought a flat on the 7th floor, Zniewska 5, kitchen, living room, balcony. My offer was the winner, but I can hardly say I hit the jackpot. When I first noticed the 12th floor block, I was horrified. It looked monstrous, and I winced at the thought of all the people living in it. So many windows, balconies and flats, so many unknown lives swarming around. From my balcony, I have a view to the edge of Petržalka and beyond. I can see fields between the blocks and Austria with its rotating wind turbines in the distance. A decent area, my colleague decided, leaning against the railings with a glass of wine. He'd invited himself round when he heard I'd bought a flat. I didn't contradict him. With a flat in the centre he'd inherited from his grandmother, he could afford to be condescending. He'd not had to do anything except wait for her death. The money I'd got from selling my mother's flat in our little town paid for about 10 square metres of the flat in Petržalka. On the other side, close to the block, there's a lake known as Dražďák. Doesn't really excite me, but maybe a bonus for a potential buyer when I sell the place 5, maximum 7 years from now. Until then, I'll save up for a proper flat, something that's more like a jackpot and definitely not on an estate. I started working hard for a living when I was still at secondary school. Ever since then, I've wanted to get off housing estates. I have no nameplate on my door. I'd no plans to befriend the neighbours. I'd not bought a spectacularly overpriced one-room flat for that purpose. I'll say hello, but that's it. No polite chit-chat in the lift, minimal eye contact, definitely no block meetings. I'm at work all day, often at the weekends too. I come home late. To my dormitory, you ask? If you like.